Everyone knows how Pompeii died. The ash, the fire, the bodies frozen in time. But that's not where the story ends. That's where it gets stranger. The morning after the volcano went silent, something nobody talks about began. Survivors were already digging through the ash before the bodies were cold. The Roman emperor showed up personally, and the poorest people in the region went back to live in the ruins and stayed for 400 years. This is the day nobody covers. Around 8 a.m. on August 25th, 79 AD, it stopped. No gradual fade. The eruption that had begun 19 hours earlier, that had thrown an ash column 33 kilometers into the sky and fired pumice at 1.5 million tons per second, simply went quiet. And what was left behind was unlike anything any living Roman had ever seen. Pompeii was gone. Not destroyed the way a battle destroys a city. Gone as in swallowed. Under 4 to 6 meters of ash and pumice, the entire city had disappeared beneath a flat grey surface. The only things still visible were the very tops of the tallest buildings, roof lines, a column's edge, the upper rim of a wall, poking through like gravestones in an enormous dead field. The coastline had physically shifted. Pyroclastic flows racing into the Bay of Naples at over 100 miles per hour had pushed the shoreline outward. The beach at Herculaneum, where hundreds of people had gathered hoping to escape by sea, no longer existed in the same place. Ships sat in a bay that looked subtly, wrongly different. The sky was the colour of a bruise. It was August, midsummer, and yet torches were needed in daylight. The sun came through like a pale disk behind smoked glass. No animals, no birds, no insects, no sound, just grey in every direction, as far as anyone could see. There is exactly one person who wrote down what the morning of August 25th looked, felt, and sounded like. His name was Pliny the Younger. He was 17 years old. He was at Misenum, the Roman naval base 30 kilometers away, and he survived. Years later, he wrote 2 letters to the historian Tacitus describing everything he witnessed. Those 2 letters are the only eyewitness account of the eruption and its aftermath that exists anywhere in the ancient world. He describes August 25th like this: the darkness was blacker and denser than any ordinary night. Torches burned in what should have been a summer morning. Ash fell in sheets so heavy that they stopped repeatedly to shake it off their shoulders because the accumulating weight could pin a person to the ground. Women were screaming. Men were calling names into the dark. People ran through the crowds making apocalyptic predictions. And in that absolute darkness, with the ground still shaking, people believed them. When the light finally returned, thin, grey, wrong, he looked out at the world and wrote that everything had changed and was buried deep in ash, like snow. A summer landscape made winter overnight. That is the morning after Vesuvius, told by the only person who left a record of it. While Pliny the Younger watched from a distance, his uncle was sailing directly toward the volcano. Pliny the Elder commanded the Roman imperial fleet. On the afternoon of August 24th, as everyone fled south along the coastal roads, he looked at the eruption column and launched his warships toward it. He had received a written plea from a friend, Rectina, whose villa sat at the volcano's base. The roads were blocked. The only escape was by sea. He redirected the entire fleet and sailed into falling ash and volcanic bombs. He couldn't reach her villa. The sea conditions were too violent. He diverted to Stabiae, south of Pompeii, where another friend was trapped. He arrived. He embraced the terrified household, took a bath, had dinner, and went to sleep. He actually snored. Either extraordinary composure or a deliberate performance to prevent panic. By the early hours of August 25th, Pompeii was being struck. Volcanic bombs hit the streets. Pumice had built up so deeply against the doors that they couldn't open outward. They tied pillows to their heads with cloth strips and walked into the darkness toward the sea. Pliny the Elder stopped. He asked to sit down. He drank water. He tried to stand. He fell. 2 slaves rushed to support him. He fell again and did not get up. His body was found 2 days later on that beach, dressed exactly as he had fallen. No wounds, no marks. His nephew wrote he looked more like a man asleep than dead. He was 55. He had died sailing toward a disaster everyone else ran from. His body was never properly buried and was lost to history. A skull discovered at Pompeii in the 19th century may or may not be his. Nobody knows. Here is the detail that surprises everyone. The majority of Pompeii's population survived. Of the estimated 15,000 to 20,000 people across Pompeii, Herculaneum, Pompeii, and Opportunists, most escaped. The eruption's first phase, the pumice fall, began around 1 p.m. on August 24th. It was terrifying but survivable, and it gave hours of warning. Most people walked out of the city and kept walking. The ones who died waited too long, sheltered in place, or went back for valuables. But the deaths that did occur tell 2 completely different stories. In Pompeii, people were buried by ash. The famous plaster casts, made in the 1860s by pouring plaster into hollow spaces the bodies left in hardened ash, show extraordinary final moments. A mother curled over her child, a man gripping a walking stick, a branch he had picked up to wade through deep pumice. He had a leg fracture from falling through the debris layer. Some victims survived the first surge and were killed during a 30-minute lull, moving again when the second surge hit faster and offered no warning. Herculaneum is different. The pyroclastic surge reached 500 degrees Celsius. For the 340 people huddled in the stone boathouses on the beach, death was instantaneous. Flesh vaporized, brains boiled and exploded inside skulls. Among the 296 skeletons found in those vaults, a pregnant woman curled over the bones of her unborn child. A soldier with a military dagger still at his hip, possibly from Pliny's rescue fleet, who died on the beach he came to save. At Opportunists, over 50 skeletons were found clustered in a single room. Slaves and servants, sheltering together, dying together. I want you to think about something for a second. If you had fled Pompeii with your family and nothing else, and 2 days later the ash had cooled enough to walk on, and you knew that somewhere under that grey surface was your home, your gold, your strongbox, what would you do? Drop your answer in the comments. Because the people of 79 AD made a choice, and it wasn't the one you'd expect. They went back, and they weren't alone. Before the bodies beneath the ash were cold, people were already digging. Pickaxes and drag hoes had been found inside Pompeii near bodies, suggesting people were tunneling through ash when a surge caught them mid-salvage or mid-robbery. Survivors came back. Opportunists arrived from neighbouring towns. People dropped through the visible rooftops of buried buildings into the rooms below. They found things: gold coins, pearl necklaces, silver tableware, buried caches hidden during the eruption that were never recovered by their owners because their owners were dead. But it wasn't only individuals. The Roman government ran its own organised salvage. Archaeological evidence shows large, systematic tunnels bearing official inscriptions. Marble was stripped from public buildings. Statues were removed from temples and forums. The dead of Pompeii were being robbed within 24 hours of their deaths, and no law existed to stop it because the city no longer legally existed. 15,000 people scattered across Campania. No camps, no organised evacuation centres, just people following the networks they already had. Most ended up along the coast: Puteoli, Naples, Cumae, Ostia. Merchants went where they had trade contacts. Families went where they had relatives. And we can track specific people through the documents that survived. The Sulpici, a prominent banking family from Pompeii, relocated to Cumae. Their financial records survive. A merchant named Aulus Umbricius Scaurus, Pompeii's most famous garum producer, whose name appeared on fish sauce amphorae shipped across the empire, moved his operation to Puteoli and rebuilt it from scratch. He had a child in his new city. He named the child Puteolanus, meaning the one from Puteoli, not from Pompeii. He wasn't going back. The new city became the new identity. But not everyone could leave. Those without money, connections, or anywhere to go, the poorest, came back. And what they came back to were the upper floors of buildings still poking above the ash. They climbed up and moved in. They built ovens in spaces that had been second-floor bedrooms. They dug down into buried lower floors and turned them into cellars and workshops. And they stayed. That informal settlement in the ruins of Pompeii lasted not weeks or months. 400 years. Ceramics, coins from successive emperors, and 4th century oil lamps bearing the Christian Chi Rho symbol tell the story of continuous human habitation in the buried city from the late 1st century all the way to the mid-5th century AD. The Roman Empire rose, declined, and converted to Christianity, and people were still living in the upper floors of Pompeii's ruins. Modern archaeologists describe what they found as a precarious and grey agglomeration, a kind of favela among the ruins. No water system, no infrastructure, no civic life, just people in the wreckage. They mined it to survive, digging up buried coins and selling stripped marble. The most prosperous city in the region became a quarry, and nobody recorded it. No writer mentioned it. No historian noted it. It happened quietly, invisibly, for 4 centuries, until the people finally left and the ruins were alone. Titus had been emperor for exactly 3 months when Vesuvius erupted. He was new to power. The Senate was watching, and the most catastrophic natural disaster in Roman history had just destroyed one of the empire's most important regions. What he did next would define his reign. He moved fast. He appointed 2 former consuls as official commissioners of Campania's restoration, specifically tasked with rebuilding the region. He released imperial treasury funds. He contributed from his own private wealth. He remitted taxes across the affected region for 5 years. And then, the move that reveals something precise about Roman power, he seized the assets of everyone who died in the eruption without leaving heirs and redirected that wealth into the relief effort. The dead of Pompeii paid for the rebuilding of the cities that absorbed their survivors. He visited the ruins personally. Once in late 79 AD, and again in the spring of 80 AD, inscriptions survive across Naples, Nola, Nuceria, Salerno and Sorrento, commemorating his name alongside rebuilt temples, restored theatres, and repaired infrastructure. Historians who study the origins of emergency governance trace the idea that a state has an obligation to respond when catastrophe strikes back to this exact moment. A young emperor standing in an ash field, deciding that something had to be done, and doing it. News in the Roman world travelled by courier, by ship, and by word of mouth along the road network. Within 24 hours, Campania knew. Within a week, Rome knew, though Rome had already seen the signs. For 2 days, Romans had watched the southern sky fill with darkness, had seen their summer sunlight filtered grey through an ash-dimmed atmosphere. They knew something enormous had happened before the messengers arrived. When the full picture came, the reaction was grief on an imperial scale. Pompeii was not a distant province. It was a resort destination for senators, a commercial centre whose goods moved across the empire, a city with theatres, amphitheatres, and a public life that Rome recognised as its own. Its loss was felt as personal and civilizational at the same time. The Latin word that recurs in the historical record is calamitas. It originally meant damage to grain crops, a harvest destroyed by weather. After 79 AD, it expanded in meaning. A destruction so total, it required a new kind of word. Calamitas is where the English word calamity comes from. Pompeii gave us the language we still use for the worst things that happened to us. Here is what happened next, in the long silence that followed. Within 2 generations, within the lifetimes of survivors' grandchildren, people began to lose track of exactly where Pompeii had stood. The ash became soil. Soil became farmland. Farmers worked fields above buried streets and buried bodies without knowing. The cities of Pompeii, Herculaneum, and Stabiae sank out of human memory so completely that by the medieval period, their precise locations were uncertain. Pompeii was lost for 1,669 years, until 1748, when workers digging near Naples hit something solid, and the morning after Vesuvius, the grey sky, the silence, the diggers, the scattered families, the emperor standing in ash, was slowly, painstakingly, skeleton by skeleton, revealed to a world that had forgotten it had ever happened. If this video made you see Pompeii differently, if the morning after hit harder than the eruption itself, subscribe, because that is exactly what this channel does. We find the angle nobody is covering, the story after the story, every single time. Hit subscribe and don't miss what comes next.